The Los Angeles Riots of 1992. A city on the edge. The 1992 Los Angeles Riots, often called the Los Angeles Uprising, did not appear out of thin air. They were the violent eruption of years of growing tension between the LAPD and the city's African-American community. The spark came on April 29, 1992, when 4 police officers were acquitted in the now infamous Rodney King trial, despite damning video evidence showing King's brutal beating. Within hours, anger turned into chaos. Fires spread. Streets descended into lawlessness. For nearly a week, Los Angeles became unrecognizable. Its skyline clouded by smoke, its neighborhoods consumed by fear. By the time order was restored on May 3rd, more than 60 people were dead, thousands were injured, and damage had reached nearly $1 billion. But the true story of the Los Angeles riots runs deeper than one verdict. Rising tensions before the storm. Throughout the 1980s, Los Angeles was a city under pressure. Unemployment surged, gangs grew powerful, and violent crime gripped poor neighborhoods. Instead of easing tensions, the Los Angeles Police Department launched aggressive campaigns that many believed unfairly targeted minority communities. The result was a simmering resentment, a sense that officers acted with impunity. One incident in August 1988 crystallized that anger. During Operation Hammer, more than 80 LAPD officers raided apartment buildings on Dalton Avenue, tearing homes apart and leaving dozens displaced. 2 years later, in January 1990, a confrontation between police and members of the Nation of Islam ended with the death of Oliver Beasley, a 27-year-old Air Force veteran. Each event widened the fracture between the community and law enforcement. The Rodney King beating. Then came the moment that changed everything. On March 3, 1991, Rodney King, an intoxicated parolee, was chased down after a high-speed pursuit. What followed was captured by a nearby resident on a handheld camera. A savage beating that left King with broken bones and a fractured skull. The footage, broadcast across America, showed officers relentlessly striking a black man long after he was subdued. For many, it was undeniable proof of brutality long suspected but rarely witnessed so plainly. Public outrage surged. On March 15th, for officers, Stacy Kuhn, Lawrence Powell, Timothy Wind, and Theodore Briceño were indicted. Yet the community's hope for justice was soon shattered. The very next day, another tragedy unfolded. 15-year-old Latasha Harlins, accused of shoplifting, was shot and killed by a Korean store owner. The sentence handed down months later, probation and community service, only deepened the sense of injustice. The trial that ignited the riots. As 1991 wore on, pressure mounted. Mayor Tom Bradley launched the Christopher Commission to investigate the LAPD, exposing a culture of excessive force. But Chief Daryl Gates stood defiant. In November, news broke that the trial of the 4 officers would not be held in Los Angeles, but in Ventura County, a venue with a predominantly white jury pool. Many feared what that would mean. And on April 29, 1992, those fears became reality. The jury acquitted all 4 officers. Within hours, Los Angeles descended into chaos. The Los Angeles Riots, the city in flames. At 3:15 p.m. on Wednesday, April 29, 1992, the verdict was read. All 4 officers charged in the Rodney King beating were acquitted, except for 1 count of excessive force left in mistrial. For many in Los Angeles, it was confirmation of a bitter truth, that justice had once again been denied. The response was swift. By late afternoon, crowds had gathered outside the Los Angeles County Courthouse. But what began as protest soon unraveled into chaos. At the intersection of Florence and Normandy, anger erupted into violence. Motorists were dragged from their cars, beaten in the streets, and television cameras captured it all. The world watched in horror as Reginald Denny, a white truck driver, was pulled from his vehicle and nearly killed by a mob. Minutes later, a Latino driver, Fidel Lopez, suffered a similar fate. The Los Angeles riots had begun, and the city was spiraling out of control. A city engulfed. Within hours, South and Central Los Angeles were ablaze. Flames consumed thousands of buildings. Storefronts were smashed open, their contents carried off by looters. The Parker Center, the LAPD's own headquarters, was attacked. For days, the city became unrecognizable. Normal life dissolved as schools, transit, and even professional sports came to a halt. Food and fuel grew scarce, while long lines formed at the few stores that dared remain open. Some business owners, particularly Korean merchants, chose to arm themselves and defend their livelihoods in pitched street battles that further deepened racial tensions. By the morning of April 30th, nearly 2,000 National Guardsmen had been deployed, but confusion and poor equipment delayed their effectiveness. The violence spread faster than the response. Can we all get along? On the third day, May 1st, a quiet, battered figure stepped forward. Rodney King himself appeared on television, pleading for peace. His words, "Can we all get along?" became a desperate echo across a fractured city. That evening, President George H.W. Bush condemned both the riots' violence and the brutality that had sparked them. He announced the deployment of thousands of federal troops to restore order. The turning point. By May 2nd, the tide had shifted. With 6,000 National Guardsmen, 4,000 federal troops, and Marines in the streets, the worst of the rioting subsided. Peaceful rallies began to replace the chaos. Volunteers came together to clean streets littered with ash and glass. Yet, the scars, both physical and emotional, were deep. On May 3rd, highways reopened. Looters faced arraignment. By May 4th, curfews lifted, schools resumed, and businesses cautiously reopened. Federal troops left Los Angeles by May 9th, and by the end of May, the National Guard had stood down. But for many, the nightmare of the Los Angeles riots was far from over. The city was quieter, yes, but the echoes of distrust, anger, and loss lingered in every burned-out storefront and every grieving household. The fire had ended, but the embers still glowed. Aftermath of the Los Angeles riots. When the smoke cleared, the Los Angeles riots had left behind a staggering toll. More than 2,000 injuries, nearly 12,000 arrests, and 63 lives lost. Over 3,000 buildings lay in ruins, 3,000 businesses destroyed or crippled. The economic cost surpassed $1 billion, leaving as many as 40,000 people suddenly without work. Rebuilding the city was no easy task. Federal grants, tax proposals, and partnerships with financial institutions poured in. Governor Pete Wilson and Mayor Tom Bradley appointed Major League Baseball Commissioner Peter Uberroth to spearhead the Rebuild LA initiative. It generated nearly $400 million in corporate pledges, while grassroots organizations rose to provide training, jobs, and a fragile sense of renewal. But beneath the surface, the wounds of distrust had not healed. The LAPD under fire. Attention quickly turned to the Los Angeles Police Department, whose reputation had been at the center of the storm. On May 11, 1992, former FBI Director William H. Webster was appointed to investigate the LAPD's response. By late June, embattled Chief Daryl Gates, long criticized for his hardline tactics, was forced to step down. In October, the Webster Commission released its report. Its findings were damning. The LAPD and City Hall had been unprepared, slow to respond, and resistant to accountability. Recommendations included putting more officers on community patrol and upgrading the city's fractured communication system. Vindication for many critics came in 1993, when Officers Stacey Kuhn and Lawrence Powell were convicted in federal court of violating Rodney King's civil rights. They each received 30 months in prison. A year later, King himself was awarded $3.8 million in a civil lawsuit against the city. Reform and resistance. Although the LAPD began experimenting with community-based programs, it resisted many of the reforms demanded by the earlier Christopher Commission. It took another scandal, the late 1990s Rampart Division corruption case, to force deeper change. In 2000, Los Angeles entered into a consent decree with the U.S. Department of Justice, giving an independent monitor oversight of police reform. Under Chief William Bratton, who took office in 2002, the LAPD began to transform its public image, emphasizing community policing and accountability. By 2013, federal oversight was finally lifted. And yet, the shadow of the Los Angeles riots continues to linger. A 2020 report revealed that police across California still disproportionately enforced low-level infractions on Black and Latino residents. 2 years later, a state board found that racial disparities in police stops and searches persisted. The story of the Los Angeles riots is not just about fire and destruction. It is about promises of reform, cycles of resistance, and the haunting question of whether true justice has ever been achieved. The flames of 1992 have long been extinguished, but their smoke still hangs in the air. If you found this deep dive into the Los Angeles riots powerful and thought-provoking, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. History Love is your go-to YouTube channel for exploring the most fascinating, haunting, and untold stories of the past.